there. I'm Miro from Our Daily Planet, and today we have with us David Kieve, who is in charge of climate and conservation outreach for the Biden campaign. So we're really excited to have David. We're, just 5 days away from the election. So he's incredibly busy, and we are really thrilled to have a little bit of his time. So thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask, the Biden campaign, this has been the first campaign in history, by our count, that put out an ad devoted solely to the issue of climate change in a swing state. Can you tell us a bit about how that ad came about and how effective it was?
Thank you for asking about that. It's something that we're really proud of as a campaign, the ad that we ran in Michigan. And I think it came about because of a couple of sort of big picture factors. One of those reasons is that the politics around climate change have changed, and it's now a winning issue among the American people. I think they understand that a transition to clean energy jobs is something that is a responsible, important thing for us to do as a nation. And then the second reason that it came about is we had the strong support of Vice President Biden. He's always believed that climate change is a really important issue facing our planet. He placed it at the center of our campaign. It was included as one of 4 existential crises that he referenced in his acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention. And that gave us a lot of leeway to really focus on the issue. What we tried to do with that video, which is actually part of a broader series that's going to be rolling out over the next couple of days, and we've got a couple more that have come down the pike, is tell real stories about real people whose lives have been impacted in material ways by climate change. And what's exciting to us about that ad in Michigan is it's in a bright red part of the state, talking about an industry that's a source of enormous civic pride in a way that we hope most Michiganders can relate to.
That's great, David. Thank you so much for telling us about that ad. We featured it in Our Daily Planet a few weeks ago because we thought it was so powerful and told such a great story about how the environment and the economy go together really well. Talk about that a little bit more, because it seems like the Republicans see it as an issue that divides Americans, but polling shows that more and more Americans support environmental protection, support clean energy, clean air, clean water. Talk about why that's become so central to the campaign.
It's become central to the campaign, I think, in part, and the vice president spoke about this really eloquently in his speech where he called President Trump a climate arsonist. Donald Trump is out there saying that the suburbs are under attack because they're being invaded by people who don't look like them if they look like me and are, comfortable and white. What Joe Biden said in that speech is that that's ridiculous, but that our suburbs are already under attack because climate change isn't coming, it's here now. There's hardly a person in all of California who hasn't been materially impacted by the wildfires that have devastated that state and that are now gripping Colorado and are back in Southern California. Throughout the Gulf Coast, we're now onto Hurricane Zeta, which is absurd. We've worked all the way through the regular alphabet. We're now all the way through the Greek alphabet. And even though I spend all day reading up on this stuff, I don't know what comes next. You probably do, Monica, but climate change is here and it's having a tremendously negative impact on people's lives. So our message to the American people is we're already paying for climate change. We can do it the smart way and try to mitigate some of these terrible impacts on people's lives, or we can keep on paying in cleanup costs along with the enormous human cost of death and destruction that is ravaging Americans.
Kind of to follow up on that point, in the last debate, Vice President Biden talked about the phase out of fossil fuels, because anyone who understands the reality of addressing climate change knows that that's what we're going to have to do to address this problem. But President Trump was really quick to pounce on that, and he made it into an incredibly political issue. I think polls show that the majority of Americans do support a transition to renewables. But could I ask you just to clarify what the vice president's stances are on phasing out of fossil fuels?
Look, I want to start by saying one thing, which is that there's only one person in this whole country who Joe Biden wants to see lose their job, and that's Donald Trump. Trump has so horribly mismanaged the response to the COVID crisis for the same reasons that he's mismanaging the response to the climate crisis. He doesn't believe in science and he's not listening to the experts. That has caused more economic damage to Americans all across this country than anything related to transitioning to clean energy. I also wanted to say that Joe Biden, his father losing his job was really a formative moment in Joe's upbringing as a boy and caused their family to move from Scranton to Delaware. Joe has lived firsthand how sensitive and traumatic that can be for not just the person who loses their job, but the people who they love and care about. That stands in pretty stark contrast to Donald Trump, who got a ton of his fame and more of his fortune than he cared to admit by going on TV and being a bully and telling people that they're fired. So this is not a punitive thing in Joe Biden's eyes. He doesn't believe that people who work in an oil patch or in a refinery are bad people, but he believes that investing in clean energy is the important, responsible thing to do for our planet, and also the thing that'll best position our economy to grow in the future, because those are the jobs that are going to be there in the future. And if America doesn't lead in that space, other countries will.
Talk about the other side of the equation. You know, there are a lot of progressives in the party who really care immensely about climate, but may be worried about whether Vice President Biden is strong enough and passionate enough on those issues. How are you going to turn those folks out with just 5 days to go? And then how about in swing states? How are you looking to use climate as an issue to turn out people in key battleground states?
There are a few ways we're doing that, but one of them is through interviews like this, where we talk about Joe Biden's character and commitment. I think what a lot of people don't remember, because there were so many candidates in the race and such a talented field of folks back in the primaries, is that Joe Biden got into the race a little bit late, but that climate was the very first policy position that he put out as a candidate. And he put it out first for a simple reason. He believed it's critically important to our country. And he also has always believed, and we as a campaign haven't figured out the best way to talk about this in a way that doesn't sound super transactional, but that climate is one of those entry point issues, especially for younger voters. And that if you don't connect with them on climate and express to them that you share their values and are committed to doing the hard work necessary on that issue, they're going to tune you out on everything else. And then in March, he came to his campaign and asked us to help develop a much more aggressive, bold set of nearer term solutions on climate change, because he felt that our opportunity to build back out of the COVID economic crisis presented a real opportunity for our country and an opportunity for us to get bolder and bigger on climate policy, which is exactly what we did. So we've been out there talking about his commitment. We also have a ton of content coming down the pike. We've talked already about the ad that we ran in Michigan. I'm pleased to share with you guys that we have at least one more ad just focused on climate change. It's coming out in the near term. We have a ton of videos telling real people's stories. We have real people out there talking every single day about the impact that this has had. And while we may not have a whole lot more events that are just climate change events, almost every event that we do is a climate change event, because Joe and Kamala are out there talking about it absolutely everywhere. The vice president went to Luzerne County in Pennsylvania, which is historically part of coal country, and he talked about crumbling bridges and levees that need to be built, and the fact that Donald Trump has neglected the promise that he's made on infrastructure and turned it into a cruel joke, and that we're going to invest in infrastructure, but we're going to do it in a way that's sustainable and resilient to help to insulate against future storms, because we know that even though we're going to take really bold action on climate starting on day one, we can't reverse all of the damage that's been done overnight. That's going to take some time.
Showing to the public that climate change isn't just a standalone issue. You know, it is connected to the economy, to racial justice issues, to national security and health. And Vice President Biden really does a good job of connecting those dots. And it seems to come pretty naturally for him. And all of us in the environmental community are always begging and pleading with lawmakers to connect those dots for their constituents and for the American people. Why do you think that is? Where does his passion for the environment come from? And why does he seem to stand out on the issues of climate and environment perhaps better than other lawmakers of his generation?
For Joe Biden, it all comes home always to Delaware, no matter what the issue is. But that's especially true of climate change. I'm hearing his voice in my head saying, Delaware is a coastal state. We're at 0 feet above sea level. We're on the front lines. We may not be in the Gulf Coast, but there have been horrible historic storms that have hit Delaware. And he also talks passionately about environmental justice. And one of the reasons why that's been so resonant to him is because his asthma came as a result of growing up as a boy in Claymont, Delaware, near the Marcus Hook, and the environmental exposure that he had through air pollution from the refineries that were nearby. So this is an area that he knows from lived experience at home in Delaware, and that nobody had to educate him on. He's always been there on it. It's why he sponsored one of the very first climate change bills ever in the US Senate way back in 1987.
Totally can relate. My daughter has asthma, and that was what got me interested in these issues working in the Senate. I can't say enough about how motivating that is. When you see your child, or when you yourself can't breathe, it is a real hard thing to deal with. And that's why we need to clean up the air and clean up the water, and why we at Our Daily Planet write what we write. And we're just so thrilled that you were able to take the time with us today, David. And we're hoping that you guys have a great last 5 days days. If there's anything that our readers or anyone who sees this in a tweet or whatever wants to do to help the campaign, what should they do now? What can they do to help out?
That's a generous question. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to make a little plug. We have launched a group called Biden Climate Voters that we're really proud of. So folks who are watching, I think we can share a link that we'd love to have you all share if you're up for it. If you've got a phone, as everyone does at this point, you can text climate to 30330 and sign up to become a Biden climate voter via text today. That's important to us for a number of reasons, not just because I want to increase the readership of my dinky little newsletter that'll keep publishing for the next 5 days, but also because we have a candidate who's campaigning on a more ambitious, aggressive climate policy plan than we've ever seen before, and who's out there campaigning and talking about it every single day, as we've spent some time talking about here. To have a robust grassroots group associated with it as well will help us do the hard work that's necessary to win this election on November 3rd. But it also helps us to tell a story further as people who care about climate, that climate played a determinative role in this election for the first time ever, at least in a presidential election. We've seen other candidates like Sheldon Whitehouse and Jay Inslee run on climate and win on climate in Washington State, Rhode Island, and other places. It's never really been done at a presidential level. And that's one of the things that's been so exciting for us to see, is that we've been breaking new ground, not just with the ads, but with a candidate who's really willing to lean forward every single day. So please text climate to 30330.
So to everyone watching, please do what David said and then become a climate voter. We have 5 days left, but it's not too late to get involved. And David, thank you again for taking the time. We really, really appreciate it.
It was
Thanks,
my
David.
pleasure. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, guys.
Good luck with the last 5 days. Let's win this.